and welcome. I'm Megha Ralapati. I oversee the residency program at Hyde Park Arts Center in Chicago. I'd like to give a warm welcome to everyone joining us today for this conversation, and especially the artists who are participating in the discussion and joining us in this virtual space today. I'd like to especially show my gratitude for you all who are participating in our multi-part virtual program, which seeks to connect art practice in Chicago and Malaysia through a group of interdisciplinary practitioners, and also build upon artist Veshalini Naidu's residency at Hyde Park Arts Center from earlier this year. I want to mention today's program is part of a larger initiative we've developed with Asian Cultural Council to deepen the connection between artists and art communities based in Chicago and across Southeast Asia through residencies, performances, virtual programs, studio visits, and other modes of engagement for artists in both geographies. So for today, we are really very thrilled to welcome Veshalini in this role as organizer and to be able to continue the artistic and idea sharing that started during the residency and started with so much enthusiasm and so much generosity. And we get to continue that work in this virtual space now with a wonderful group of artists over the next couple of months. This program speaks very directly to the goals of the residency program in the essential nature of connecting community-based practices and finding their counterparts across the world. So I would like to thank Asian Cultural Council for its support of this program. So with that, I will turn it over to Vesha, our organizer, to introduce the program and the artists. Thank you.
Hey, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to this journey. It's going to be a really interesting conversation about anti-racist practices at home and abroad. Yeah, my name is Vesha, as mentioned. And the reason that I have come to this is because lately I've been very curious about what it looks like as people who, in the context of Malaysia, a colony now becoming independent and still having these similar structures, being in spaces and art making, which has also been in white. How do we make sure that within our own process of making art, not just the institutional level, that we are having these and practicing anti-racist values and creating work that is inclusive, as we then also try to shape the greater structures within the system. Yes, and with me today are really people, which I am very excited to speak to, and I will let them just very quickly introduce themselves, who they are and what they do, and then yeah, we'll get to it. Rupa, would you like to start?
Hi, thank you, Vesha. I'm really excited to be part of this conversation. My name is Rupa Subramaniam. My background really was in digital media, and I turned to very traditional formats where I can use my hand because I felt like that was a skill that was slowly slipping out of me. And since then, I have been a visual artist first, moving into the curator's role. But what I think has been the foundation of my work is sort of an intersection between community, digital space, as well as some sort of artistic. So I try to work with artists of different kinds and redefine what creativity or innovation in that space actually means. So I'm not used to the idea of my work being called maybe racist work. And so this is still quite fresh, the idea of it itself. So it's with peers like Dhinesha and Vesha. I think some of the artists are also figuring out in Malaysia, where do we stand when it comes to languages like this? How do we define our work in these spaces? And I'm really looking forward to have this conversation go on, and I'll pass this to Dhinesha to introduce himself.
Thanks, Rupa. Thank you, Vesha, for trusting us with this conversation, and Jenny. Really excited to see where this goes today, as well as in the subsequent conversations we have. My name is Dhinesha Karthigesu. I used to pronounce he, him, his. I am a multidisciplinary storyteller. A lot of the stories I tell revolve at the moment around spaces like theater, as well as comics, and occasionally visual arts and poetry. I believe in this idea of telling queer and Malaysian stories while also holding space for conversations on identity and creativity. I'd actually also like to name the fact that, considering it's a conversation between Chicago and Malaysia, that one of the things that really helped clarify the work and art that I make was watching a Chicago drag queen by the name of Shea Coulee on RuPaul's Drag Race All-Stars Season 5. And in the final episode, there was a conversation, and she basically named how her drag is a love letter to Black women. And there was something about watching her say that sort of clicked in my head. So now I sort of quote, reference, and paraphrase Shea Coulee everywhere I go to say how much my work is a love letter to brown boys. I'd also like to reference the fact that I use the word brown a lot when talking about this, but brown means a lot of different identities, especially even within Nusantara and Southeast Asia. But when I'm talking about the word brown, I'm referencing the Malaysian Indian identity, Malaysian Indian bodies, and people of Malaysian Indian descent. And for me, the anti-racist conversation began through the medium of theater and has now occupied my entire life as I question it in all art forms and everything that I do. Yeah, that's all for now. I will pass it to Nikki.
Thank you. Appreciate it. My name is Nikki Patin. I am an artist working in a lot of different practices. I'm also a mom, so if you see a 7-year-old pop up in the background, don't be alarmed. He belongs to me. Same face. I got, sorry about that. I got my start as a spoken word artist, also like singer-songwriter, been in like 10 bands, dabbled in burlesque, I've dabbled in visual art. Ultimately, I think that my sort of family background has really pushed me to claim this work often when I wanted to put it down and kind of do other things. My grandmother, who was a white Jewish woman, was a writer, a poet, and she would leave her poems all over the house, and they were never seen or heard by anybody. Her father was virulently racist, and so in a work that I'm immersed in right now, I'm working on a biomythography, and one part of it, and I feel like this kind of sums up my whole situation. I have a letter to my great-grandfather, and I tell him in that letter that the only way that he has relevance now is through the mouth of his Black granddaughter, as a racist white man. And so to me, my work is all about looking at the intersections of so many different identities that I straddle. So, we're looking at race, but we're also looking at gender. We're looking at sexuality. We're looking at size. As a 42-year-old, single mother, we're looking at that. We're looking at class. I grew up in a, very poor family, in projects in Chicago, southeast side of the city. And so to me, when we talk about racism, when we talk about anti-racism showing up in work, I can't pull it apart from all the other things that I'm also sort of confronting in the work that I do. So to me, I like to just kind of embrace all of it and throw it all into the pot, say a lot of things that make people very uncomfortable. That's my happy place. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Jenn.
I'll say to everything Nikki just said. Yes, I'm so excited to be here. I'm Jenn Freeman, also known as Pochop, my she, her. I am a multidisciplinary artist, but I am rooted in burlesque, drag, nightlife scene. Recently, my work has been geared towards reframing, reimagining who we worship and praise, using the work of our Lord as sacred text, and really creating worship services where her work is, our guiding light. And that has been transformative for my life as well as my art practice. and really thinking about, I also don't really think that I ever have used the term anti-racist when I think about my art practice, but preparing for this talk, I was like, I guess that is what I'm doing. Like really, I guess, but I do it as a way to heal my own self. I grew up in the church as a queer Black person, and like it was a thing that I had to confront in order to free myself. And so, yeah, that's who I am. And I'm going to go with Jackie.
Hello, everybody. First of all, it's an honor to be sharing space with all of you. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Jacquelyn Carmen Guerrero. I am a multidisciplinary artist working in performance and visual art, as well as organizing spaces and events. I'm originally from Miami, Florida, and I have a multiracial background that is Puerto Rican, Afro-Cuban, and also European descent. So my work, my personal art practice really is to unpack and process these different facets of identity, from race to gender and sexuality, on a public scale. And my organizing practice is around creating inclusive spaces for community and sharing art and sharing music and sharing love on the dance floor. And so I also DJ. I DJ Coochie Fruit. And yeah, it's just an honor to be here. So thank you.
Thank you all so much for sharing. I think listening to all of you talk about your practice, and though it's like, it's a summary though, it's so powerful, because I think it already gets to the thing that we all are overlapping with each other, which is identity and identity with the body. And that's kind of where I want to like begin this conversation, is a time either within your own practice, within work, or maybe otherwise, where you felt your whole body and the identities that intersects with feeling safe and belonged. And if there is an almost like that space that you wish to create or recreate or are creating within the work that you do. Yeah. And anyone can answer this. Yeah.
So I want to jump in and say that I don't know if I've ever felt safe in my work. I just don't. I mean, I think that, you know, as a you know, bigger Black person who's queer, I feel like the second that I step onto a stage, like expectations are already loaded. And that's shifted over the last 20 years. Like that shifted from like Monique to like Lizzo. Like that's, you know, like I can see like that spectrum and how our sort of like perceptions around, you know, bigger Black femme bodies, you know, have been perceived, and how I've either, you know, played with that or against that. And that's now, I think, conscious decision making that I'm doing as a performer. Am I going, you know, with the grain of people's expectations or against the grain of people's expectations? So that's something that I think about. The other piece that I want to say is that for me, the goal is no longer safety, as much as it is about break. That's one thing that we say in a group that I help to found, and we meet once a week, called Surviving the Mic, which is, you know, for survivors of trauma. And that's what we say about our community guidelines, that we can't promise anyone that we can keep them safe, but what we can do and what we work toward is to keep folks brave, and we can't do that. So that I think to me is where, with that feeling, like it's never felt safe. And when it has felt, you know, it just never has for me.
Yeah, I definitely relate to what Nikki said. I think in my whole process, I've been, or rather when I work with brown bodies. I did a project where for 30 days I invited women to come in and speak to me. So in exchange for their stories, I painted on their bodies and I documented what sort of that meant for them. So it was in a way for me like a modern day ritual to maybe identify the person who was inside or wearing the body. Like I was asking questions like, what is that relationship between the mind, body, and soul? And then really trying to figure out which parts of how the community or the society was looking at them. And I realized like the women who came to me had a spectrum of experiences, and it can the trauma or the foundation that they had for wanting to come to that practice with me really diverse, right? The overarching theme of bravery, like how you cope with yourself, is I thought how much power they gave onto somebody else to define the narration of the story, and how many of them took power for themselves. And so the feeling of safety then maybe comes from me defining it, that I can choose my peers or I can choose my audiences, whether in a physical space or on a digital space. But there are times where my work does not kind of listen to me, and it beyond, or it's got a mind of its own, right? So it sort of like spreads in a way I have no control over. So when I know that could happen, and the context of the audience, I feel is not my responsibility to educate or nurture or inform. So it sort of becomes doing this because this is my voice, and I fought really hard to find this voice, and I'm in that space where I'm comfortable sharing that voice as well, so that like maybe someone else who does it then has a different interpretation of it, or wakes up in their own context of how they relate to this in their bodies, right? And every time I experience that with my audience, when they have a sort of a moment where they like, I've never thought of it that way, almost then reflects back to me and my art practice, and gives me again new layers to work around, to interpret. So that I think that just that whole process of exploring, you definitely need bravery, because like it kind of would maybe sometimes push you to a corner where you yourself haven't been there before, and to confront that space, you need that guts, and how that comes out as an output, again I feel it's not in my control, but that feeling I hold then becomes what I work with, I suppose.
Mm. 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 Yeah, actually, yeah, both what you said, Rupa, and also that's a very good point, right? Is it safety or is it bravery? And now that I'm reflecting too, like I don't think I've ever actually felt safe, not even within my own work. But yes, braver to react and move. Like if I can think of one, most recently was actually a reading for Dhinesha's play called Ramayana, which is a retelling of the Ramayana with a queer lens. It was the first time I was seeing an almost all Indian cast and sitting there reading, which is a rarity, and it shouldn't it occurred to me that it shouldn't take a reimagination of an Indian epic to bring Indian people together like this. but for the first time, I walked into a theater space and I'm actually not, I am manifesting in this space as the identities that I hold as queer and as Indian. And that is fine. That's not something that needs to be filtered in any way possible. And as much as I knew that cerebrally, I needed to see it, and have my body be in that space to kind of go like, oh, right. This is why the work needs to keep happening. And I love, like, I've been following Surviving Something, Nikki, that you've also like post on Facebook, and it's been really good to also look at the language also that you do share, right? Language that's more affirming, language that is braver, and I love this idea of framing, right? Surviving something, or this idea of survival, as also how we go through the world, because I think a lot of times there is this kind of filtering that tends to happen too, right? This idea of thriving, or we tell ourselves that, okay, yes, that the world is ours, or like, you know, we can take up space, you know, this is it, when that's not necessarily true. There's a lot of other things that are happening in the background, and that it's instead not so much that we're coming out of this unscathed and this is, you know, like, here's the wonder of Indian, but no, this is the survival of Indian, right? And like I of an as anti-racist practice, that the anti-racist practice is the survival of this, of being colonized, of being an indentured labor, being enslaved, of being consistently demonized and also subjugated to this day, and that everything that we do within the intersections that we exist is this survival of our current climate, which I really appreciate. Yeah.
Thanks, Fasha. Yeah, I mean, I think, like, for me, there were two moments as a performer that kind of turning points for me, and they were both moments that felt extremely dangerous. The first was a piece called Sweat, which was the piece that ended up on HBO, where I was running in place, and it had this very visceral impact on me, where I was out of breath in front of an audience, which, as a bigger person, like, felt like the gateway to, like, hell and embarrassment and humility. But stepping into that discomfort brought me to, like, a different place artistically. And then the second moment was when I performed burlesque, because taking off in front of an audience wasn't, you know, it didn't feel like something that, like, people were, like, necessarily excited about. You know, it was something that actually people would come up to me afterward and be like, "You're so brave for taking off clothes," which they only say to you when they hate your body. Like, you know, "You're so brave," because, like, you're not really showing off as much as you're sort of I don't know, like, exposing or confessing something. And so to me, like, that idea of, like, danger or discomfort has been something that's always pushed my practice further. The more uncomfortable, the more sort of dangerous it feels to me, that's when I know that I'm kind of on the right track.
On this note of danger, that reminds me of Dee, your piece that you did for this festival that happened last year, 2019. It's called Urban Scapes. It's this kind of like one of those, you know, really hippie, I mean, what's the word? Gentrifying festivals that take over the city. And Dee and I were part of a poetry ensemble that was all Indian. And I think what was really interesting is that, you know, one, the location, and one, never see an all Indian poetry to begin with. But Dee, yeah, maybe you could tell us a little bit more about what that experience was for you, especially, and what you brought into that space.
Sure. I think for me, that particular bit, and, you know, especially, so just 2 points that Nikki had said that I was like, I need to reference it. Nikki, first of all, Sweat is amazing. I've watched the video. I remember just screaming at the screen at how brilliant that performance piece is. But the earlier bit you said earlier about a letter to your great-grandfather, and I really resonate with that, just because I'm currently piecing together an actual letter to my great-grandfather, submission for a zine, and just wondering what that conversation is with someone who doesn't exist anymore, and how different our lives are and the choices we're making. So I just wanted to reference those two things. With regards to this performance piece, basically, as Nikki and Rupa, both of you were talking, I was reminded of how a lot of my work starts here and in my, but it actually doesn't involve my body. My body makes me very uncomfortable. Utilizing my body makes me very uncomfortable. Being in my body makes me very uncomfortable, which also plays out in ways that I sort of like, I guess now that I'm thinking about ways that I punish my body or try to push my body to its exhaustion and things like that. But that particular bit involved me sort of like almost like removing layers of clothing, but also removing layers of identity, and just being like that I am Indian, I am queer, I am male, I am all of these things. And to be fair, I was wearing like, it was like a shirt, and there was like a singlet, and then the shirt comes off, and then another shirt goes on top. And like, it's nothing, like absolutely nothing. I was really not, like, it was not really bare bone. There was just that, you know, in an audience of people I didn't know, in an open space, in a public space, it was very uncomfortable for me. And that's a whole tangent. But I think that's just because I really just this revelation of just, I don't step into my body a lot. And in moments of stepping into my body and vulnerability on stage, I have a tendency to have a lot of guards up. I protect myself, which is, I feel, sometimes a detriment. But basically, this performance just involved me in the middle of a courtyard, running through these different identities and talking about it and referencing it, and ended with me basically putting on a T-shirt that says, it says I am a Kaling too, and for context to everyone, the Kaling, or the K word, as I'm going to reference it from now on, is a word that has been used against the Malaysian Indian community, that while it may have roots, its roots are debatable, it has now become a slur. And so I was wearing that shirt in reference to a friend who was sort of trying to reclaim the word. I don't think the N word with the Black community, I would reference it to say how it feels to us as bad as that, but it really isn't as bad as that, but it is a bad word. But that's the best way to describe how bad that word is. And a friend was reclaiming the word, and I was very deliberate to throw it on as part of the final bit of performance, and to just watch the audience words and just go, oh, he just went there. And then also like those who cannot see, trying to be like, what's the word? And then like being like, I can't say the word out loud, it's a bad word. And just seeing that sort of interaction take place with the word. A lot of people have different reactions. And have you sort of reference a friend who is trying to claim that word. But for me, generally, I also want to say, hearing what Rupa and Nikki said, I think I definitely operate with a lot of male privilege in a world that is made to make me feel safe. And therefore, I tend to operate in a way that is very safe, because the world is designed for people like me who present very male, tend to be straight passing at times, and cisgender. So just to reference that as well, I think it's important, because a lot of people think male privilege is because they're stupid. Yeah.
You know, it reminds me of the work that you actually do, Jen. When I was going to your website, and I saw the People's Church, and I saw the video on litany, and how vulnerable I thought that was. I'm curious, like, what was going through your mind actually, in the performance of it, kind of becoming these very important iconographic figures, but in the by having that context also in the now, right? And having that on your body. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, a part of identifying as kind of a less performer is yes, I'm shedding, layers, but I think also there's a vulnerability that comes with that I also want, I want that to be clear too, that I am revealing a part of my identity as well. I also totally agree that it's interesting when you're putting your body out there that way, the way that people respond, especially when we could perform because I think when people witness your body really bare in a performance mode, it creates a feeling that they now own a part of it, gives them a in to comment, to say things like, you're so brave, or oh my God, those things, or like whatever it is. And I think in their mind, like it's intended to be positive, but they don't realize within themselves like what is behind that. Yeah, I didn't answer your question at all, but I was just thinking about that while thinking about taking my clothes off. Yeah.
No, which is such a good point. Yeah.
I think what goes through my mind is honestly trying to connect with spirit. I'm trying to connect to what I the Holy Spirit, but to spirit. I'm trying to get free. I'm trying to like release all of the barriers that I put into my mind when it comes to movement, when it comes to art making, like all of those little whispers that pop up in my brain. I'm trying to shake them off.
I call that rare air. That's what I call it. It just happens to me. For me, it happens so rarely, which is why I call it rare air. When you're in that space where for me, it really feels like I'm just channeling. Like I'm not even like, I'm not thinking. I'm not like, I'm just very present and like very into like what is happening in that moment. I'm not really thinking about the audience, thinking about what I should be looking like, what I should be sounding like. I'm just literally channeling whatever is happening in that moment. But it's for me a very rare. I think that's the goal, is to like figure out like, how do I get there, and how do I like get there like all the time. So still working on it.
My note, I mean, just in response to like Jen, and we've known each other for many years, starting through burlesque, and also acknowledging the history of burlesque and how white of a space that it is. And I think for many probably burlesque performers, it is about look at my body, and and for others there's political intentions, or even just being and engaging in this art form is a political statement in and of itself. And so and the kind of work that you produce, Jen, is so like it's like it really transcends that genre. And so that I was just like, it's I think being exposing like a physicality, but also like that spirit, that inner intention, I don't know, really powerful. So I was just thinking about that. And I know that there are a lot of artists that are overlooked in the history of burlesque, artists of Black burlesque performers too. And so it's like having the visibility and your like legacy help you transform those conceptions is really important. And Nikki too. I know I'm just talking to Jen because I've known Jen for a long time, but I know Nikki that is a part of your practice too. And so also acknowledging that it has a significance and legacy of what you're doing.
Yeah, I was even thinking about we were talking about danger. Some of the spaces that we were in together performing Coochie, and like in hindsight, it wasn't necessarily dangerous, but it was dangerous. Like I just remember like you specifically doing some very provocative acts, and like provocative in like a way that like, honestly, I think it went over a lot of people's heads, but it just made them so uncomfortable. Like they had a visceral response. And like, I mean, I think that is dangerous because in those spaces, like, I don't know, they didn't know how to respond. You know what I'm saying? Like, I feel like sometimes when people don't respond, it just like, it's like shaking and like opening, really, like it can be messy for the, but as an artist, sometimes it could be dangerous for us if we don't feel it. Be reckless. Yeah. I don't think
definitely like in the beginning, I never felt like I wanted to perform in a lot of the spaces where it was like a lot of white men, like, you know, things like that. And eventually, you know, bringing drag into it. I feel like those are maybe the performances that you're talking about where like, maybe I'm wrong, but there is like a gender queer presentation and an exploration of gender outside of like a high femme, I don't know, it is a flamboyant expression of like masculinity and sexuality in a way that I do think that people weren't ready.
No, they weren't ready. And it's like afterwards, I definitely remember thinking, but they needed it. They needed that lesson. And as much as like they needed it, I also was like, at what cost to artists? Like at what cost to us are we giving these people these sermons that they definitely need to be taking notes of? But what does that mean for our spirits too? Like, when do we need to ourselves?
Yeah, especially when it's like you're just performing for tips, or you know, everybody else is making money you, because if you don't get tipped, you don't make money in some of these situations. And so like, yeah, what is the you know, the economic situation, you know, like, is it, you know, fluctuating, you know, kind of like the consumption of our bodies. And I think that is, you know, sometimes there is a benefit to it of like, oh, I'm getting this experience, or like, I just want to share my work, or I just want to perform. But then after a while, you know, it becomes really oppressive after a while. And that's when, you know, I think artists like go disappear for a while because it took so much and you gave so much, and it's like you bared your soul and your body, like everything. But I think that's, you know, I think we've all kind of taken away our lessons on how to make our practice sustainable, like not only, you know, financially, but also like spiritually sustainable.
That's a really good point. I've been thinking about that too, right? This idea of almost like the minority labor, of having to do the education and you're doing it with the work, right? And people come in and then they consume it. And as much as it's, yes, you are, it is platforming, it is representation, right? It's making space. How so much of, so like, oh, it happens so many times, right? Where the people who come in and they just kind of like, oh my God, look at all this, like, oh, all this culture, which I feel like, Rupa, you might be able to speak to, especially with the banana leaf exhibition that happened last year, which all three of us were involved. Dee and I did a project together called Roja, which was about, it's a research-led project where we collect stories from Indian women, from Malaysian women, and collecting their stories, all of it rooted in the sari. And so we had like an installation. It's a stretch of sari cloth that we collected from 2 different states, the state where I'm in, which is Negeri Sembilan, and for Dee, it's in Selangor, which is where KL is in. And we had all these anecdotes that we had from people that we spoke to, as well as their saris, in the space, right, which is filled with also other Indian artists. And a question that was going through my mind throughout the entire thing is also like how this is so powerful for Malaysian Indians, right? To enter this space, especially the location, GMBB being this kind of like, you know, very What's another word for atas? The English word. I am missing it. I suppose like fluent, maybe.
Affluent,
Yeah. Just kind of classist in ways.
Bougie.
Bougie. Yes, yes, bougie. You know, and us sitting here and knowing, right, like there's certain people who are walking into the space looking at this art, right, which was a lot of labor of love and very important, and was an entire journey for a lot of the artists in there, kind of just going like, wow, how beautiful, right? Look at these saris, look at this color, you know, and within the exhibitions, right, the photography exhibitions of these Indian bodies, right, which are so, I think, which is so powerful and confrontational to just go and like, oh, how nice. There's a group of Indian people, and just kind of like, and losing the significance of why this is here. Yeah. And I think as organizer, Rupa, I think you can definitely say a lot more to that, right?
Yeah, I think giving context to the work, to maybe points of view. One is the sari itself. It's about a 4-meter long traditional garment that is usually glorified in certain occasions, and in certain other occasions it's deemed inappropriate, sexy. So there's also this idea of policing how the Indian women who are wearing the garment, like it's like we don't have say towards how we want to fashion it, how we want to carry it. Rather, it's been imposed on us, at least in the few years that I've been active in the scene, to say exactly this is how you can and cannot wear it. And the idea of decency then ranges from, you know, what would your brother say about this? What would this random person you meet on the street say about this? So really the idea for this, or the rage I got from this, started in 2017 because there was a group of that wanted to threaten to spray paint women who were wearing this traditional attire, because your midriff is visible, and said that, like, you know, showing too much of skin is your invitation to be harassed publicly, and therefore if I find you in the street and take a spray paint, spray your body in public. There were not many people that actually thought that this was harassment. Instead, they were sort of rationalizing why this is an appropriate thing to do, because they have to safeguard brown Indian women's bodies. So my works maybe started as a tongue-in-cheek response, because you know, these guys are going to spray paint these women. I should paint their bodies instead, because at least it'll be prettier. And that's kind of how I started to have this conversation around saris. And when Vesha and Dhinesha installed their work in the banana leaf exhibition, it was glorious to see the kind of responses we were getting from our audiences, because people sat down. What Vesha and Dhinesha did was to invite the audiences to reflect upon this garment, to think about what they felt when they saw this work, right? So there were mothers coming the point of view of how it was sad for her to see her child draped in a sari, because it meant that she has now lost a child, and the child, her daughter, is now going to be, in a way, judged by society, you know. And there was so much sadness in what this woman wrote, but there was also things like, someone had said that when I first saw a woman in a sari, I thought she was God. And that was then very powerful to read as well, to say that, like, these are the spectrums that the audiences are thinking about the work. And so for the exhibition then to be viewed by people of different ethnicity and different racial backgrounds. From the organizer's point of view, it was quite easy to see who found it powerful. Um, it was the people that I was representing, because they said, I've never seen um, the glory of brown people all in one place, and just the diverse representation of all the different social classes that exist within this whole minority group, right? And that was precisely what banana leaf was meant to do. And banana leaf, again, for context, is a traditional Indian meal we have where um, plenty of dishes are served on quite physical banana leaf itself with rice. And I thought that was how I wanted to serve art as well, that like all of us could sit in for that meal and have a completely different after. Like you could have a really filling, huge vegetarian meal if you wanted to, or you could have a really spicy one that completely leaves you thirsting for water, or a very small portion. The meal itself gives you that much freedom and flexibility. Um, and again, even the culture of having banana leaf is now a more commercial experience in Asia. So people don't understand the context of how traditionally banana leaf meals were served to public, and why it was such a communal experience. And so kind of bringing back all of these ancient ideas in the Hindu practices um, in a more contemporary space, and doing it with a twist of like maybe um, I wouldn't say fun, but just where the Indian artists that are working on those subject matters are are genuinely expressing it or are genuinely going through it. And then for us to have space that we can put this out there, again, because most of the gallery spaces in Malaysia would ask you to sign a documentation that says you cannot touch racial or political issues, or any subject matters that relates to sexuality or nudity, right? So when I then organize, how do I negotiate these spaces? How do I keep my artists safe? And with the different audiences that come in, how do they perceive and view this work? When sometimes they may not have context to why those works exist. So yeah, that Dhinesha, do you want to share experience, like how then also from that time we worked together, it's been a year since, kind of like thinking about how powerful that experience was for us as well to also connect. But at the same time, I think the conversation has taken like different parts completely.
I'm sure. I think it's I want to also point out how we talk about our work, how a lot of us, I guess we build language around our work, right? Like our terminology, vocabulary, and we're able to talk about it. Like, Rupa was the one who gave me and Vesha the term multidisciplinary, and we're like, oh yeah, we are. Okay, we're gonna call ourselves that now. And we build language around things, and we're like, I think we make it sound really awesome. Which is useful because then, the systems require us to build ourselves up. But I also remember as I were building that visual arts installation, we were just, like half the time, we had no idea what we were doing. And we were just like, we're just going to laugh. We're going to make this all seem intentional. But really, halfway through, we're like, I don't know. We're just going with the flow. I want to sort of name that a little because I think as there's a lot that is flow. There's a lot that is sort of trust and run with the process. But also, we then conjure, I suppose, explanations later on once we've done it, And I think just because it was for both of us, it was our first visual arts installation. And just putting it together and just like coming up with excuses in our head, oh, this is why we're doing this, this is why we're doing this. And then see people catch that intention a little or like find different variations of it. I think our biggest surprise, or at least that I'm surprised, was the instinct to get the audience to participate. I don't think we were anticipating the response. From 12 transcripts to, what was our final count? 48?
72 was the
yeah.
final count.
72. Yeah, we started with 12 transcripts of people's response to the sari that was printed, and then audiences came in. We had paper, pen ready, and people just started responding. And some of them responded in Tamil, which is a language that, at least for me, I can. But yeah, so we had people writing in languages that they were familiar with, people writing in, people drew stuff, and it was just this like massive, over 2 weeks, we had all of this come in where people were just responding to this material. And even the collection itself, basically what we did was we just said, hi, we're looking for saris, anybody wants to donate? And we were kind of hoping that people would give us one from the collection, except we had aunties call us and be like, I have boxes, come. And so Vesha and I basically drove all these 2 states, just meeting all these like random Indian aunties, like, take saris, and giving us bags and bags of saris, which are still in our car. In Vesha's case, it's in their place, but it's just hundreds of saris. And then we still get these calls to this day. A year later to be like, hi, do you all still need saris? My friend wants to give them away. And I'm like, sorry, auntie, but thank you, but I cannot. I have no place to put it ready. Please stop giving me saris. But I think for us, that was the community element that we were not expecting. The audience response, as well as this sort of network of Indian aunties who just wanted to talk to us and find out what we were doing and just give us stuff for free and just be like, this is my old saris, I won't use it anymore. Or like, I'm in the country, please take this. And then just to see that was really fascinating. I guess that's been the community-based response. Yeah.
I think like you brought up a really good point, Dee, about the ways that we build ourselves up. Because so another thing that kind of occurred to me, this idea of bios, right? As artists, how we list our accomplishments. And recently I was in a conversation with my partner, and they were saying that, for their bio, that they learned this like from being in these radical spaces in the US. They spent 5 years in Boston and, did their dance training there. And they said that they don't, so within their bio, they actually, instead of like being the whole like graduated from so notable performances are, it is instead that they are, they are Malaysian Chinese settler, right? And kind of like naming just their ancestry and naming their position and naming where they come from and what heritage is, and also what the consequence of that heritage is. And I wonder, like, one made me think about how, as we do these practices, right, as we take over spaces which are sign off and silence us and say, don't talk about race, or when we do performances in a festival, right, when we put our bodies at risk, whether the spaces, whether it's enough to just like, I guess maybe the question really is, can the work truly be anti-racist if the environment is not? If we are having to, you write a play that is we believe, and it is in forms, in the way you synthesized it was anti-racist, but to put it in a black box, can it still hold that? If we were to engage grant systems and funding and what that looks like and the structures of the funding, can it still be anti-racist? What is a way that we can continue to build in spaces where yes, funding is an issue, and finding that kind of stability is an issue? Is there a way for this to not actually be a compromise? Is there a holistic approach making fully anti-racist work, if that is even a possible question? Yeah.
I'm going to jump my recent experience. I teach art as well, 4 years old until like 19 years old. So we had a small art competition going on, and we had great submissions. And as the teacher, I chose the works based on the progress that my students have been showing, as well as like their dedication and commitment to my classes, and also how well did they interpret the brief that I gave them. So when I was done selecting like the top four works, and when we were putting down the name, I realized that it was an all non-majority name list, right? So there were 3 Indians and 1 Chinese name in that winning list. So the question of diversity came out in and representation. So because all of my peers were also Indians, we were then worried if we would be accused of being biased to our own kind, if this name list would go out, and because there was no representative from the majority race, which for us, the Malay community. I think and the kind of simple solution was to remove one of the art pieces that was more similar, but I think the student that I picked, I picked particularly because of the technique and the execution was by a huge way very different to other that was kind of similar in the output of it. And then I thought it was really unfair just to take one student's work out and put another student's work in, because my final output to the community has to be representative and has to be diverse. So then my role here as an art teacher, or then as a judge, and am I being anti-racist if I am being inclusive and if I am trying to be diverse, or am I actually going against what I am thinking about by sort of succumbing to that pressure of needing to include a representative from different races, not just by merit, right? So I'm thinking about that. I don't have the solutions, and either way I go, I think there's a sense of guilt, or there's a sense of like, what is the choice that I'm not making here? Yeah.
So we call that a trick bag.
Oh, go Nikki, go Nikki.
That's what we call that. It's a slang term that I use often in my life. Being put into a trick bag, meaning that like no matter how you try to get out, you're just caught up. So if you do it based on like merit, and like your 4 merit-based people are all that look like you're accused of like, oh, you're prejudiced and privileging your own folks. If you do the other thing where you're sort of like overcompensating for like picking all the people that look like you, then all of a sudden it's no longer, there's like literally no way to win, because the game is rigged and the system's rigged. And so I think, like, to your point, Vesha, like, is there a way of basically doing anti-racist, work here in the United States? To me, I mean, if you're going to pay me some money, that's probably going to end up in Jeff Bezos' pockets, like, who owns Amazon, or it's going to end up in like some other owner's pockets. I would say, like, when I knew I was doing actively anti-racist work would have to have been in my early 20s, growing up in Chicago, where my high school flag was the Confederate flag until 1993. Folks were right, and this was a public high school. Folks were right around, and I don't know if y'all know what the Confederate flag is, but it was used to represent the South in the Civil War. They lost. They still haven't, like, come to terms with that. And so white folks in the South suburbs were actively riding around with like Confederate flags in the backs of their cars on their t-shirts. And I would, as a young, very baby poet, I would go to this Irish bar that was above the municipal airport in Lansing, Illinois, which now is like pretty much all Black, but back then was like all like racist white folks. And it was an Irish theme bar. It was all musicians in the open mic. It was their cars in the parking lots had like Confederate flags like in their back windows, and people were sporting this. And I was going in as like the only like Black person, spoken word person without like an instrument, definitely not Irish. And I was like, let me spit all these poems about race right here. Like, I wasn't making any money. Nobody was trying to give me any money. People were like clearly uncomfortable. And I think that's where I developed my taste for that danger. Cause I'm like, what you gonna do? Like, what, y'all all gonna beat my ass like in a bar? Like, we still in the 90s. Like, you know, like you're not gonna like stop me from saying what I want to say. Like, sorry, I'm killing everybody's vibe, but you need to hear all of these things that I have to say. That's probably for me. I felt like I was doing like holistically, like actively, like intentionally, like racist, like let me put this shit right back up in your face work. But now, 20 years later, where there's like, you know, a lot of checks involved, I don't know if I can say the same thing.
I think on the note of sort of like connecting the question you asked, Vesha, as well as the earlier bit about bios, I wonder what it's like also as people of color, and how it's almost like a privilege to be able to write like a frilly bio that people don't really understand, that resonates with your practice, because then people don't take you seriously because they look at it and just like, ugh. Like I remember I used to get my bio when I would put in things like slam champion. Like nobody gets it. Nobody knows what that is. But the moment you do something like that, it suddenly makes you seem amazing. And then suddenly people are like, oh, I shall take this person seriously. And I've been in so many spaces where I white men, especially because, just so context as well, a lot of our international school systems here employ white teachers to teach English and other languages, who get paid really, really well, who can sort of like bounce around between schools, bounce around between countries, just waltz around the world. And I've been in a lot of places where I was the teacher and I was the person who was running the workshop, but because there was a white man there, everybody assumed he was going to teach, and everybody gravitates towards him. And then when the announcer starts, and then they're like, oh, you mean it's the brown boy? Oh, okay. And then like sort of like turn their attention. So I wonder also with the bios, how much we have to sometimes amp ourselves up, because if not, we don't get taken seriously. And I wonder if anyone else has, without having to like go into trauma porn, but you know, I wonder if that's something that someone else also works with in connection to this idea of anti-racism, I guess.
Yeah, I for sure identify with it. I also connected to like grant writing in general. I think there's like a certain language that you have to put when writing a grant that is rooted in academia, rooted in like institutional like language, that is in a way it is a privilege to be able to access that language and have it about your work, as well as having a clean bio that has some accolades on it, that is recognizable. Definitely has made me more palatable almost, like, and also it allows, like you were saying, to take me seriously, particularly as somebody who has a name, who asks people to like put pochop in writing. You know what I mean? Like a lot of people will try to ignore that identity. But yeah, I definitely agree with that. I also have been thinking about following the, like, I haven't actually done it, but following the money. I think a part of like me taking on the definer of saying that my work is anti-racist, I think it means that I have to like be me, if I'm gonna say that for real. I think that I have to be able to know where the money came from these foundations, as well as how am I spending it when it comes to materials, costumes, space, ticket price, like all of that, as well as like the venue, like space is going to be, what is their policies, what does the bathrooms look like, are they calling the police, like these things. I feel like it's my responsibility to know and to, I don't want to say have control over, but to be aware of, and make a clear choice about.
Jen, I'm wondering how you feel about this idea then, you know, when you start asking those questions and then not to like spiral into a black hole of like question, and then sit in the corner and just cry and be like, too many questions, I can't take it anymore. Yeah, so I'm wondering how you're feeling about that, like, and how are you processing it and working through that?
Slowly. Okay. Yeah, very slowly. I'll spiral, and then I'll be like, well, all money, in my mind, honestly, I have already spiraled. And all money leads to the prison industrial complex. And I'm like, burn it down. So I've already kind of spiraled, honestly. Yeah, and now, again, I'm really slowing down my art practice and like how I'm sharing my work, who is connected with my work. Like I'm trying at least to be very deliberate, even more deliberate about that. And even that within itself is a privilege. Like it's a privilege to be able to be like, no, I'm not working with you, to say no to someone. Yeah.
I'm also then thinking about like, earlier we were discussing about how art is education, and then now probably art is sort of then a responsibility. When does that become a burden? And when the entire community sort of first is excited about you representing the work, and then suddenly starts imposing on you like you're supposed to represent, then every day part of the discussion. And do we have enough room space to carry the entire burden on our shoulders? So I'm negotiating with those ideas as well. How do you guys feel about it?
I just before we continue, unfortunately, we are running out of time. Which is really sad. I know. But yes, on that question, and I think like you, Jackie, as someone who organizes, right, as a performer who's also creating space at the same time and having these dances, and I think like what's interesting is also the intersectionality of those identities within the space, right? How does that practice of anti-racism kind of like come in and manifest in the way you like function as organizer, which is a whole like thing, and then also as performer? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that for me, the desire to organize and co-organize spaces comes out of the desire to have a space for myself, where, you know, like, again, going almost back to the very beginning of safety, right? We moved away from the language of safe spaces. You know, that was a thing in like 2005 to 2015, maybe, and then Nikki and Jenn can both speak to this, and so the idea, language around brave spaces and agreements and things like that. And I think it's a fine sometimes between creating space and making room and policing space, you know, and what goes on in there with or regulating rules and things like that. It can be really difficult to, and it could be a little bit of that, what Nikki, we were saying, a little bit of a trick bag sometimes when you are, you know, trying to not oppress and to not be, you know, perpetuate harm in spaces. So I think that like what I was, it's a lot. But ultimately, it's like also a need to like, protect and protect like the integrity of a space and protect like an ideology and culture ultimately that becomes collectively produced. And I think I've struggled a lot with like, thinking about language of like what it means to be a cultural picture or, similar things like that, even what it means to be an artist responding to, responding to racism or responding to homophobia, transphobia, all these phobias when, I think I have issue with the idea that I feel like there can be a of artists that like artists are just ones who respond to things, and I'm just like, no. Yes, but no, like I feel like that those ideas can become really like problematic because everybody responds to oppression and racism and violence every day in their own ways. And so I that was like my kind of responding to everybody's comments in one comment. And I really want to keep talking because I was also wondering if there are conversations about like reverse in Malaysia, what kind of conversations might be happening about that. So sorry to flip it, a little bit, but I think that ultimately, like with Trobiteca, which I created with my partner, Murillo, who is Mexican American, like it is just wanting to have a space for community to express and wanting to foster that experimentation and a space to thrive and get our coins, dollars, and things like that. So.
So much for sharing, Jackie.
And to celebrate lives.
Yes. Okay, I'm so sorry, everyone, that we have run out of time. So I suppose in closing, and I'll invite all of y'all to share thoughts. Yes, I wish we had get into that reverse racism and that complexity, but perhaps you'll be able to later with conversations among each other after this. Yes, final thoughts, everyone. Our final thoughts also, no compulsion.
We go on hours about all of these things and all of the similarities and connections between our practices. And yeah, looking forward to more conversation.
I think these dialogues are really necessary. I think it's important to unpack what we do, how we do what we do. For me, starting in the arts was like an act of survival. It was a thing that like got me through a lot of like dark situations. And I think, my personal evolution has been one from a place of like what I needed to do to heal to actually then moving with like intentionality and consciousness. And it's taken a really long time to get to that point. And I don't even think I'm at like a particular point. But I think who are not white, that trick bag of to think of other layers of things, of safety, of protection, of decolonization. Where's my money going? Where's my money from? Institutions am I holding up? Even as I feel like tearing things down. I think it's just a lot, I think, to hold. And so I think these conversations are an excellent way to, I think, help that a little bit, because I think all of us are holding some piece of that, even if it's like subconscious. Like I think all of us wrestle with like, where's it coming from? Where's it going? Either critiquing or criticizing or analyzing or what it is. Also, what am I doing as a so thank you, Vesha, for providing us this platform to do that.
Yeah, I think for me, the question then sort of comes back to what do I feel it's right, going back to how I feel as a brown person in a brown body. um, I think working working more with my gut. So how what does my instinct say about moving forward with things? So I'm learning how to listen to my body in a very different way, rather than using the intellect to move forward with things. Um, and I actually looking forward to spend the next maybe 10 years just exploring this part of the process, to let the body lead with its senses, rather than move forward things intellectually. So that's also maybe what I'm getting out of this whole conversation, what I'm excited to pursue next. So I really, really am excited about seeing how our works all sort of interact with each other, and how this would cue to different processes in our making. Yeah.
For me, I think it's just the like Rupa said, just very excited to see where these different conversations can go. I feel like we just started something like there was this like we were just there, and then yeah, just there, we were right there. And so it'll be very interesting to see where it goes in like separate conversations and things like that. For me, definitely the idea of like Jackie said, to celebrate lives. I think it's making me think how this conversation has reminded me of body, and so celebrate our lives, celebrate our bodies, and like tapping into that a lot more. But also, Jen, when you were talking about this idea of like following the money, I think it makes me, I don't know, I feel affirmed and excited, because I think when Vesha and I, or Rupa and I, have our conversations on this, we sometimes feel at a loss, or we feel like with spiral, but it's also so fascinating to know that other people are asking the same questions, and despite where everybody is in the artistic career, we are asking these questions. There's something quite affirming and empowering that we're all asking these questions at different points, and also all still struggling in that questioning and not having answers just yet, and that being okay. I think that's coming up for me.
I don't have anything to add. I feel like I echo everyone else's closing statement. Yeah. I look forward to more conversation.
Can I say one little thing really quick before we leave?
Go.
I personally have, I like encourage people to redistribute resources can to communities, and that's definitely part of the thing that Tropiteca functions to do, is like redistribute resources to our community, to people of color, Black and brown people, trans people, queer people that are, have been denied access to these resources. And so sometimes I like snatch the bag so that everybody can have more, so that's all I wanted to say.
Yes. Which totally reminds me, I think in closing, I just want to say, in preparation for this, Tanuja Devi, who is a Chicago dramaturg, in an interview mentioned the resource that theater, I mean, as a theater person, like the amount of resource that theaters have, and that in situations, communities which do not have as much, and what that role is to actually redistribute, and that perception, right, that in artists or like in art spaces that we don't have enough, there is a scarcity, which is true. It's very true. There is a scarcity, but to be within that privilege, and how do we analyze and reflect on that privilege and find ways to then actually platform and support. And I think to, in a way, like to quote Nicole Brewer, who's also doing a lot of work on anti-racist theater, she said that, yes, that everyone has privilege, a certain amount of privilege. It's about identifying what that is, right? And how do you use it? So yes, thank you everyone for being here, for using the spaces that you have, using the talents that you have, using your gut, as Rupa has said, to kind of lead you into doing this really, really important work. And I agree with Dhinesha, we just almost just kind of, but hopefully we get to unpack this more later. And yeah, thank you so much for your time. Yeah, and thank you for watching. Good night, Chicago.
We will be right back. Tune in for our next show, which will be right. And yeah, please stay tuned. shortly.
I said empty your be formless, shapeless, like water, like water. Now you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup, becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle, becomes the bottle. You put it in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now water can flow, or it can crash. Water, my friend,
Be soon. We'll be back in 3 minutes.
be formless, shapeless, like water. Now you put water into it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put it in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now water can flow, or it can crash. Be water, my friend.
can you come out? Everybody from Sebastian, can you come out? Come on. Yeah, come out.
So we are officially recording. Hello, my name is John H. Guevara. I am from Chuquimaca. Welcome to the Virtual Center Sundays for exploring global opportunity arts. This is a pre-recorded video, as you probably already know. Within the Zoom art world and just how responding to the pandemic, this is where we're at in the art world. So we're going to give you 3 minutes of answering about exploring global opportunities through the arts between active projects. My project is Chuquimarca. It's a library project space in Chicago. Jose Luis Benavides is going to introduce himself in a couple of seconds. We'll explain more. Sin Cinta Previa. It's a Latinx and queer archive video series here in Chicago as well. So to get into it, I just want to thank Sierra from the Hyde Park Art Center for being so generous with my project, Chuquimarca's project program. I am part of the Chuquimarca project as part of the Artists from Chicago 2.0 exhibition right now that's going on at the Hyde Park Art Center. I have my installation there in my background. It's on the second floor for anyone who's going to go visit. It's basically a library installation taking the books from the Hyde Park Art Center library to the space specific to Native Caribbean and Latin American art and culture and histories. So thank you, Sierra. I think that Jose Luis Benavides, you could take it away and explain more of your project, and then we could get into the questions.
Yeah, thank you, John. And thanks to the Hyde Park Art Center and Sierra for the invitation. As John said, I'm from Sin Cinta Previa, which is a Latinx video arts series. And now it was always as an archive series to archive and sort of screen the works, archive the screenings and the events themselves online with pictures of the events and the talks that we've had. And also to now archive digitally and use the archive digitally as a way to screen work in the virtual world, because we can't have physical screenings anymore, right? That's why we're also pre-recording this event and talking to you all this way. So we're just going to answer these questions. Park asked us about how we kind of engage the global and the international. To answer the first question, or to throw that to both of us, who are we, what do we do, what our practice, we kind of answered that. More specifically, I'm a visual artist and educator in Chicago. I teach at one of the community colleges, Wright College. I'm also a librarian, work with the Chicago Public Library in Back of the Yards with U Media, working with teens and our digital fabrication lab there. And of course, run this series and make my own films and art. So our experience with the global and the international is kind of off the bat our first question. John, do you want to answer that first, and then I can answer?
Let's just get into it. So the first question is, why do you think global international opportunities are important for an artist's practice and growth? What have you personally gained from them? Do you want to answer first, or should I go?
Yeah, answer. Go ahead.
Yeah, with global opportunities, I think in any chance you have if you do have a chance to like go to different cities, experience different ecosystems, like be in the midst of different communities, I think it always brings in new different perspective and new knowledges that can form an artist's practice. Either rather like it could be in like a formal, like how you approach an aesthetic, or like how you take care of a certain dialogue or discourse or a history that you learned at a museum somewhere. And it could really open your eyes to like any cultural sensitivity to any objects, iconography, etc. So definitely going into like, even like in the States, like nationally and internationally, you get a better sense of how to grow your practice with different experiences as you go on trips, you know. But with trips, it's also like with traveling and tourism, you're kind of dealing with like a fine line between, are you like appropriating a culture where you found like a cute little you know, Peruvian bag and want to incorporate to your work. So those conversations, I think, open up to more once you're in front of and working with or just visiting some other city. So I think global and international opportunities are necessary in order to really make trying to reach like a larger audience in your art making.
What would you say is a specific example of that, and what did you specifically gain from that experience of going abroad?
Yeah, okay, so in my specific context, in terms of like as a researcher base, not as an artist, there was lots of like nuances going to like going to a residency in Quito, Ecuador, where you really like know more of that art world and that art community and what their needs are, and how to help it, as you know, in my perspective, not as an artist but as someone who was doing research work. I think those nuances until like you're in it, right? So you could like read as much here in your own city with like whatever resource you have available, but at the end of the day, the first sources of that discourse are in that city. So with the Ecuadorian trip, Chicago was very hard to find like contemporary art books that is on Latin America. Not just like the Mexican or Puerto Rican discourse, but also like Brazilian or Peruvian or Chile, you know. So with one of the focus of space looking for those art books. So looking for the art books here in Chicago or in the States is super, super harder than it is to just go somewhere else outside the States. Where the conversations and the books are being made, writing the text is being produced, and there's scholars down there. To go to the source, right? The primary source versus like having it trickle down, like a secondary source where stuff could get lost in translation. So it's definitely, you gain more different perspectives. You gain more community and just knowledge and vocabulary of their specific communities, depending on what city, right? Like, again, if you could go to any country in Asia, same kind of thing. Like, in my specific discourse, it's South America and Latin American countries, but definitely if you're an artist in the middle of England and you want to know more about Asian contemporary art, et cetera, you could, it's important to like go to the source at times. So
yeah, totally. I think in my own experience, it's very similar. Like, for example, having a show of my own personal work in Mexico City through a publication, Terremoto, and then making friends with like independent spaces there, DIY spaces that are very familiar to us as independent programmers and spaces ourselves, project spaces, like being in this kind of lateral level with another organization of ragtag kind of do-it-yourself DIY people that are also just have a lot of passion and intelligence and desire to create space, communities of artists that, you know, then would bring me back to have and host a conversation. For example, Tlaxcala, a micro space that was able to house, and now doing it virtually. Those kind of interactions where, and also the access to language, right? We're both bilingual, so we both speak Spanish and can communicate and read. Probably not as best as we would like, but you know, growing up in the diaspora, but I can, and I'm sure you can too, John. So finding the resources, asking the right questions, being able to get those books, going even just to a museum in Mexico City, case, one of my diasporic homelands, is crucial to being engaged with the. And I think seeing kind of how much more advanced and how ahead of the curve the conversations are around politics and art, and the engagement of the political as an open conversation that's always been inherent to the arts, is interesting to come back to the States and see that things are a little bit lagging, a little bit behind. There's I would say an adherence towards formalism in the U.S. and to the material that is really, really behind the times. And I think the fact that we've gone to the virtual and that people are interested in the screen and so interested in video work now and engaging and trying to figure out new ways to connect internationally or even within the local through accessible media had forever, at least as far as my mind is concerned as a video maker born in the 80s. We've had video. I haven't had access to video as a production means because I was raised working class and poor. So, but ideally, the institutions have access to these things and these conversations, like the internet, for a long time. So, the political was like of the international conversation in this really intense way. For example, like maybe 10 years ago, I was in Mexico and into the Contemporary Art Museum of the Mayo, or no, not of the Mayo, the one across the street. I think it's just like the Contemporary Art Museum, forget the name. And they had a full exhibition about prison art and working within prisons and prison reform. We're barely having those exhibitions now in Chicago, like last year, first time. So having that perspective is really, really key to me and to engaging my practice. And knowing the conversation might kind of go over some heads in the States, and it will actually be more adept for an international audience, and being okay with that and knowing that like probably not going to get that gallery show in Chicago, or probably not going to get that opportunity to speak or that residency in Chicago. But lo and behold, I have had a residency in Spain, was able to screen Sin Cinta in a private way there, able to do conversations about anti-racism, being Black and Indigenous experimental video artists and documentarians in Mexico, while in tandem with the project and work that I had to kind of initiate and make myself here in Chicago too. So that's the way that I would engage with the international, or have benefited from it. Let's do the next question maybe. How best about the international artistic opportunities for your practice, and how can others do the same? How to best seek out the international artistic opportunities and grow your practice, and how can others do the same?
Yeah, in terms of like the project, again, my view from an administrator view, I'm not an artist, but to seek out international artistic opportunities, I think Jose Luis, you've done really well with the Cita Previa Chuquimarca Open Call 2020. That was funded by the Propeller Fund. How you wanted it to open it up to be international, right? I specifically in the Chuquimarca portion of it wanted like let's focus for the exhibition portion of it. Let's just focus on Chicago. However, with your know-how of what you're already in the experimental video realm, how video is an accessible format to just go back and forth cross borders, so seeing the internet. Your approach in the open call was like, no, the video portion has to be international, right? So I think that that's one of our ways to keep this international dialogue going between countries and communities. So with open calls is a good strategy to open up the international. I know now with like the internet, everyone's doing international open calls. And I can't speak to their practice, like other art projects and other art organizations doing international open calls. If it works for their project, it works for the project. And I think it works beautifully for your project, as it was always in conversation. I think for Chuquimarca being the exhibition portion of the open call that we both did, for that to be international didn't make sense, right? We talked about this, how Chuquimarca, the exhibition portion has to first focus on local Chicago community, now internationally wise. So that's why with the Chuquimarca project, it's only exhibiting Chicago folks. So there was this nice balance between having that local, non-local, international, national conversation and strategy that we use for that open call. And how others can do the same. I mean, if you have an open call, it's very hard to gauge with these screens, like who's on the other side getting this information. But if you do have some sort of practice that has opportunities in international open calls, feel free to just jump and see what happens. For me and Jose Luis specifically, we already been in the international community since the jumps and working, right? So I always went to Ecuador every summer, right? So I already knew how to go into these spaces from a perspective where I'm not just going to visit, I'm literally living there. We've lived there and we've organically are part of those communities. And if you're not someone who didn't have the opportunity or that privilege to like live somewhere else outside the States, I think just jump for it and see what happens. To each his own, their history and how they go about their ties to other communities. Is what me and Jose Luis are more organic to. So I don't know if you have anything to say to that, Jose Luis.
Yeah, I mean, seeking the opportunities. I feel like once you find that residency internationally, or you just kind of plug in. I think you also mentioned or didn't mention social media's impact in this, and I don't have an Instagram or Sin Previa because I kind of pull with the idea that I am Sin Previa. Unfortunately, I don't have a team. I mean, you're also just you do more collaborative work with your projects, but you also are the sole person running Chuquimarca. So I don't have the bandwidth, the mental, or like the energy to make 2 social media accounts for myself and 1 for Previa. So I just prefer to be transparent and honest and just have people follow a hashtag and know about some kind of I don't know, rumor or word of mouth kind of way, or works or collaborating with spaces. My project is roving, and that I can kind of nomadically go from space and collaborate with Comfort Station, Film Front, 6018 North, and being here or in Mexico or Spain or wherever. I don't require, I think, the social media presence. However, of course, it would help. I'm saying ultimately you can find the whole international art residency world and connect through them through social media. And I do you're fluent in the language of the community there, you can access people pretty easily that way. I mean, it may sound like a cliche, but I think once you touch base in the country, of course, it's gonna happen. It helps if you have a show or work to present there first as an introduction, as your business card, but that's professionalism and art world stuff later. Just to switch up the slides a little bit too, there's an example of Sintinta Previa's website and how we're now using it. I'm using it now just as an archive of images and screenings we've had in the past to actually put up video content of the works and have people view the videos online. We just had our first awardees of the Propeller Fund collaboration, Sintinta Previa and Chuquimarca, and we featured some artists that are from across the diaspora, from across the Americas, Brazilian and Mexican, and Nancy is, remind me again? Honduran, yes, she's Honduran. So yes, we had quite an international reach and perspective through this talk. There we are, and there's all of our friends, all 17 of us, which we did record and will promote and on Chuquimarca's YouTube page soon. Just a shameless little plug. But yeah, I think this is just examples of how it all kind of comes together and how we can. For this event, we had folks tap in from Spain because we had a little, registration. We had folks from Taiwan. Like, it was kind of to have actually an international reach with the content that we're producing and the conversation and the discourse that we're engaging, right? I'll give some more slides and context to images as we go, but do we want to move to the next question so we're not stuck?
Yeah, and I think just to underline, I don't think we're like seeking like it's one of our agendas. I think we're just naturally, organically already been part of these international discourses from the jump. So if you don't have access to these international communities, we're not to like what you should be doing. So, but next question, how does engaging artistic practice and audience differ based upon geography in your opinion?
Do you want to answer it?
Yeah, I think I answered this previously about how like once you're in that city, once you're in that ecosystem, once you're to those movers and shakers of that specific city, country, you would know what the needs and wants are. You would know what people want to have a conversation about. And that differs a lot. So like of what program should be happening in that country, right? An example of that, I don't know if you have an example of that. I don't think I have an example of that off the top of my head, but
well, actually, I think we can flip it more local to give it an actual more specific context. I mean, you always talk about this, and you brought it up already earlier in the talk right now, in terms of the discourse kind of being dominated by Mexican and Mexican nationalities or identities in Chicago, and how that like pan-Latino or Latinx conversation perhaps also then excludes your own identity being Ecuadorian or my other half being Cuban and a whole other set of peoples that are Afro-descendant, not Spanish speaking, and also indigenous, right? So these identities and these markers are kind of not whole. So maybe you always said, and I don't want to take your words, but you always say that you work in the regional approach and not an identity-based approach for your projects and your definition of the project, and that in some way kind of addresses this question, even though it's more local than it is international. Because right, Latinx doesn't really work as an term internationally. It's like our internal moniker. But you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think in terms of locality, basically culture is made through localities with the people that are in that city and in that community. I think is what I'm trying to get at. For what José Luis is mentioning, that specifically focusing on the location that you come from, that you experience, that you've been tied to, that you're tethered with, or whatever, from whatever experience you're at, whether you are, just living in one place for like 1,000 years, or if you're just like a nomadic person that goes space to space to space, place to place to place, in geography. I think your approach to things obviously are different, right? There's the other day, in one of our talks, someone commented that they came to Chicago to study at SIC. Their assumption was from Texas, and their assumption was, I thought coming to Chicago, it being a liberal democratic state, blue state, I'm a talk more freely and liberal and like, et cetera, et cetera. But he's like, that's completely wrong. I found more here than Texas. So it's like, welcome to Chicago, the racist city in the whole of the United States. But he wouldn't have known that if he never came to Chicago. In Chicago one weekend versus like really living here and like touching your shoulder and speaking, conversating with people here, you would. So I think in terms of how like the audiences differ, right? That's an example right there of how just the space and place change someone's perspective on something, and to always take that into account. I think another example would probably be like how contemporary Mexican artists who come to Chicago sometimes don't feel like they're included with the conversation with the National Museum of Mexican Art. Again, if Chicago is like this global city, you wouldn't know that, until you get here. Science changes, and the perception, the practice, the statistics practice change once our goals as an artist change once they get to that they thought was like, this global conversation. So
yeah, and I think that the local might not know that thing either. The local Latino or the local Mexican might not understand how ostracizing the discourse can be to that international new arrival, that immigrant, that person that has come here to study or to live for the rest of their life because of their refugees or because of economic strife and dictatorships back home, right? Like, how would they know and how do they engage a mostly English or an Americanized kind of context of that diasporic experience? These are like real contentions that like only being of immigrant families ourselves can we kind of contend with and address and be sensitive to. It's hard. But also, like, as an example with the Ebony Bailey's work, who you're seeing the image of here, not to tell someone else's story, I'd rather people speak for themselves. She's a Blaxican, African American and Mexican person who was raised in California, and we've screened her work, and she would just tell you, she has talked in our one of the events this summer about going to Mexico and how having a passport kind of changes everything. Having a U.S. passport changes everything. The discrimination that she would feel in Mexico, being kind of assumed to be a Dominican immigrant or migrant coming to take jobs away from the Mexicans in Mexico and being disrespected. But then that conversation is flipping and switching once they know that she speaks English and that she's actually has a U.S. holding passport and she has that privilege. And so, like, balancing all those experiences like kind of changes your world. Going to customs for the first time or however many times, and changes your perception of like what you have and what you don't have when you go back home, like what your citizenship actually means in certain places. And I don't know, I think that's really important and something that I've learned from. And just some examples and images, having 30 people show up to Ebony's talk is really heartwarming. And it was also a collaboration between Filmfront, a local micro cinema, and we and redistributing those propeller funds to have like Janelle Miller, is more based in the African American experience and community, also a film programmer leading the conversation with and for us. Other artists coming actually, because I think that we're also about to hit time. It's 1:26 in our
I think we just have like 3 more questions, but
Let's go.
I mean, they're all the questions are kind of basically bringing up the same kind of base of like where we're coming at. So like, I think it's all just fluid of what we're talking about, right? I think something else in terms that just popped up in my brain, like in terms of like how to bridge the audiences. I think what's that Makelit the program, the project Makelit, right? What's it called?
I don't know that project.
Like Mexico City focused exchange with Chicago's literary community. I think they're
Oh yeah.
Makelit Lit and Loose Festival.
Yes, Lit and Loose.
I think they're one of the more their program and how they're handling like the two facing audiences from Mexico City and Chicago is really actually really well done every year. So definitely check anyone who's interested in like who does it. You know, would be that Lit and Loose. Make Lit Loose Festival is what's it called. And right now they're doing their program, so obviously all virtual. But in terms of like talking with the audience and bridging those communities, they're really good at double facing the audiences.
Yeah, having it like, maybe from the get-go, you're like we were always saying as like the reason for the program, not like an ancillary secondary afterthought. Like, oh, we also have to address the international, or oh, we also have to address another language. Like, no, it's inherent.
It's always like, and they have everything always in bilingual and always like going back and forth, like the half and half from Chicago have artists. So it's like they're really good at making opportunities like that grow.
Yeah. And I think as immigrants, as being parts of immigrant communities, I would say we can tell and we can feel when something is like you just slapped on the Spanish and the mistranslation is, versus, oh, you thought of this question and this message in Spanish with a Spanish speaker, and that means you have them on staff. They're also programming these ideas with you to engage that community. I think one of the things that I didn't highlight is just like this little like factoid of working in the Chicago community colleges of the Chicago that like literally yesterday I got an email about diversity and addressing anti-racism and you know supporting not supporting anti-blackness but effort to end anti-blackness in the school. And sort of as a very telling note of information, they give the demographics of the city colleges. And something that was just really disheartening for me to see is that the college has a student body of 50% Latinx students, but only a 14% faculty and staff working to support those 50%. And like, I'm sure that that's every institution in the city of Chicago like that. Not one of the ones I would say like City of Chicago colleges, but you know, that's our reality. That's what we're unfortunate. That's the context that made us create these spaces and to have this conversation and kind of also to just like jump ship and go to the to be like, we're not getting what we need here. So as some privileged people with passports, I'm going to go find it somewhere else. And I'm going to grab that from the museum somewhere else because I'm sure I'll find it here, right? And that's unfortunate that way, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that brings up a good point that we do speak Spanish, right? We do know, we already have an international language, even though Spanish is obviously one of the, I think, second language spoken here in the States. And again, the United States doesn't have an official language. So it is a language spoken here in the States, but we already know Spanish. And again, just from the jump, we've been connected. So we already know these nuances of like when the translation's bad or like it was an afterthought organization or institution. And switch is on, right? Like I think Jose, like we're both project spaces right now. So like, I know I don't translate most of my stuff in Spanish because it's like, I'm talking to Chicago people, I'm talking to people here first. And my translation, there is a question here about like, what are some obstacles you have faced? I don't know if you could go into that, but like one of the obstacles I have is Spanish in terms of art speaking in Spanish, right? Art speaking in English is also just different than regular English. So think about it, art speaking in Spanish, it's in itself that I'm constantly kind of always trying to be better at. And I think in terms of being an international, like what are the obstacles of being a global project? For me, that's just one of the ways. But however, again, I think my first and foremost audience is English speaking Chicago, not just the Latino community, but also the Caribbean community, also the indigenous community here in Chicago. So I think accessibility to the Spanish portion, yeah, it's one, we named some of our programs in Spanish. Some of it's bilingual. So, I mean, some of it's Spanglish, right? Specifically Spanglish, that we're not translating the Spanish to English. Because that's, for that audience, it was specific to somebody, right? And that's how, as a creative mode, the one that I created, it was a creative expression as opposed to trying to be accessible or trying to be like scholarly and theory for that. And just how, you know, depending, like if the mindset is that like I just really trying to make this accessible versus like, is it just a creative practice? For me, that was that moment. But for others, it definitely is. When I partnered up with Porta Espacios, Porta Espacios is a art project, a digital art project based in Venezuela. We partnered up for our last show, the Carlos Salazar show. Solo show, basically we're both projecting the same show within our digital platforms. I think Porta Espacios right now is a revisit in their platform. I'm going to submit something else, going to reveal something new in the coming months of the exhibition. However, for that show, I was consciously always posting like in Spanish in terms of stories and like talking to the community there in Spanish, which we didn't go into. Maybe we could go into this in terms of the question, how do you continue to cultivate these relationships? Or wait, no, there was another question. But like,
just mix them up because I think we're a little bit over time anyways, but let's keep going.
Yeah. So going to like, how do we just sustain these international communities? Like me going back always to like messaging them, like sharing content with them through the internet, just going back and forth with projects. And I'm doing that in Spanish, right? I'm not talking to them in English. I'm going to their language to really be part of that discourse and that conversation that they're having.
Totally. And I mean that's reflected in the work that I think I screen. That I've screened from a lot of the examples I just given, even like the one that's on the screen now, the Tlatelolco massacre, the 300 some odd students that were murdered by the Mexican government. Like again, talking about the political immediately, talking about an international conversation because that's U.S. supported, backed political dictatorship in Mexico for 70 years that initiated this massacre, right? But not to just focus on the Mexican and the Mexican experience, like having Argentinian, a mentor of mine, a filmmaker, Silvia Malagrino from UIC, who was my advisor, screening her work within the community, right? Film about the Argentinian dictatorship and engaging Puerto Rican conversation, lesbian Puerto Rican filmmaker that I love, Francis Negron Montaner, and this is from the event we had at Comfort Station. Like again, it being a part of and struggling with translation is kind of my biggest thing. Like, and also the rights to support, like to support the artist, to pay for the proper way to screen the works. Sometimes if they're not a friend that I can access easily or an associate in some way, and that was what the urge to get our fund was for, to be able to translate at least the work, which I have had to do out of pocket or pay a service to, to write the transcript and transcribe and subtitle an entire video for me of someone else's work so that it's, like a little easier. And of course also having support like by sponsors like the Video Data Bank and paying for the work of Coco Fusco to screen legitimately in the space, so that I'm not underwriting her right as an artist. But again, in that being adherent to the initial phases of the initial jump off of Sin Cinta Previa, that like Cuban, Puerto Rican, Afro descendant queer artists, video makers were the breath, the whole reason for the series. And it's again not ancillary, it's not secondary to the idea of what Latinx means, at least to me, that that I would include these conversations. I can't have the conversations without those perspectives, because those perspectives, those are the ones that have informed me and that I hold dear and respect more than anything else, as a queer person, you know, and a Cuban and Mexican descendant diaspora, right? That's kind of like all I've got for Sin Cinta Previa and the, but is there something that we didn't really address?
We addressed that. We just how do you continue to cultivate these relationships once you return home? We already said it. We just like email, like speaking on their language, informally sharing content with them, etc. One of the obstacles you, like you talked about that, but if you wanted to, but I did. But the last question here is, how have you all been able to leverage crossing geography during this time where things have gone virtual, and what takeaways do you hope to bring with you into the public sphere of future? I think we already touched on some of them. I mean, for the Venezuela, I had like, there was what was it, like people zoomed in from Venezuela and from like just internationally. I don't think, again, these aren't like you have to hit that quota of international in my mind. So that kind of organically already happened because we were already in conversation and communication with these different artists that were coming from a specific community outside outside the Chicago sphere. Takeaway, I think, would be just that the Zoom art world for me definitely speeded up more conversations that could have not happened solely in Chicago. So that's definitely a takeaway in terms of what the Zoom art world has been affected, or like have I benefited and had to work through during these pandemic times. So
yeah, I think similarly, it's actually just made it a richer landscape, and the video work already fits in because, like, to be honest, nobody's gonna really spend money in tickets to see experimental video art in a theater. Which also, to note, like, that's part of the reason and the difficulties that I've had. Like, there was no Cinta Previa launched before Latin America, or Panorama Latinx, the GL's program of open call for these kinds of works. It launched before they have even had their open call, and of course screening before they had their first screening. So essentially was seeing a landscape of a void of a place international Latinx, again, for lack of a better term, video artists, experimental makers, to exhibit their work. And so if they saw and was collecting this work and seeing a need for the space, that so that there was a work to be screened. Of course, I won't screen within Sin Cinta Previa, but it's just hopefully like maybe a more accessible platform for people experimenting with things that might not be as crisp to land on the Cisco's screen, that may be a little bit more discourse based and less image and formalist based. But I think that that's my hope, that we'll be able to continue and get more visibility and scope for folks. One of the things that was really interesting one time, John, when you brought up from Columbia College to one of my screenings at Comfort Station, the inaugural screenings, they were just kind of like shocked and impressed or happy that they were seeing this kind of work, because the landscape in Chicago, according to this person, was essentially Latinx crafts, hand arts, and that was like essentially all they could of Latinx art space, DIY driven zines. And there's some great zine makers that we have in Chicago, but they weren't addressing this international contemporary practice, experimental, especially not video, because video doesn't get screened essentially anywhere, I feel like. But yeah, that's the hope, keep doing it and to have more of these opportunities and conversations, right?
Yeah, I mean, we go always back and forth of like our landscapes and the future of our projects and why we're doing it. I think the global is just one aspect of why we're doing it. I know we're doing it for like a million more reasons. That could be a whole, I feel like we should just have one whole talk of it, because I think we could pack it just in a short 30-45 minute talk. We never can. So that's why we made our spaces respectively to have these global conversations, local, global conversations of how we've been managing different discourses around this hemisphere and around the globe, right? Because there is audiences in Europe and Africa and Japan that our specific discourses have always been touched on, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, those are all the questions. We got a good 40 minutes in. I think we're good here. Yeah, I think we're good. I don't know, any last words or?
I would just say thanks, and that's a wrap.
Yeah, thank you everyone who watched this video. Definitely follow our project, sessintaprevia.com, for Jose Luis video archive series screenings. And Chuquimarca, it's CHUQUIMA. I don't know if the stuff says, but definitely in any promo that has spit out for this talk, definitely just Google us, and I think there should be the sources to our sites and Instagram handles. Instagram handle for Chuquimarca is @chuquimarca.projects. So yeah, look us up. Reach us out for anything if you guys want to have more conversations. And thank you to the Hyde Park Arts Center. Thank you to Sierra. This has been a cute Cultural Center Sunday talk with me and Jose Luis. Hopefully everyone enjoyed it. So everyone, enjoy the rest of your Sunday or whenever you're seeing this, and see you guys soon. Ciao.
Thank you all so much for tuning in. Have a wonderful rest of your Sunday.